Let's dive into a parenting philosophy that, on the surface, seems like a total paradox. We're talking about a world where strict, predictable order is actually the secret ingredient to creating radically independent kids. Welcome to the German approach to raising children.
I want you to picture something. It's chilly, it's damp, you're in a German forest, and a bunch of preschoolers are, well, they're busy. One kid is trying to get a small fire going. Another one, who's maybe 3 years old, is using a real, actual saw to cut a branch. And their teacher? They're just standing nearby, watching, not jumping in. This isn't some crazy survivalist boot camp. Nope, it's a Waldkindergarten, a forest kindergarten, and it's the perfect window into this entire philosophy.
So when you see that, what's your first reaction? Probably that it's just pure chaos, right? Maybe even a little neglectful. But what if it's not? What if all of that, the mud, the saws, the freedom, is actually the result of a really deep, structured philosophy about how kids learn and grow? That's the big question we're going to unpack.
So how in the world do you get to a place where kids are safely using tools in the woods? Well, it all starts with a huge cultural shock. Something an American mom named Sarah Zask wrote about when she moved to Berlin. It's a complete shift in how you even think about the parent-child relationship.
This one idea. This right here changes absolutely everything. Now I know, at first that might sound a little cold, maybe a bit distant, but it's not about a lack of love at all. It's the philosophical starting point that completely reframes your job as a parent.
Let's break down what that really looks like. If you have that ownership view, your gut instinct is to jump in, to control things, to wipe out every possible risk, and to make all the big decisions for them. But if you switch to the self-ownership view, your role completely flips. You're not there to control, you're there to empower and train. You're not trying to eliminate risk, you're coaching them on how to manage it. And you're not just deciding for them, you're slowly and intentionally handing control over to them.
And that's the core shift right there. You're changing your job title from owner to guardian. An owner, they hold on tight forever. But a guardian? Their number one job is to prepare their kid for the day they walk out the door, ready to stand on their own 2 feet, competently and confidently.
Okay, so if the end goal is all this independence, where does that classic German stereotype of Ordnung, or order, fit into all this? I mean, when most of us hear German order, we think of rigid rules and iron-fisted discipline, right? Well, in parenting, it actually means something way more interesting.
And here is the key. Ordnung isn't a cage designed to restrict them. It's the strong, reliable framework that makes real freedom possible. It's the set of routines and rules that makes the world feel predictable and safe, which in turn gives a child the confidence to explore, to take risks, and to actually be independent. So this framework really rests on 3 pillars. First, you've got structure. We're talking consistent schedules, meal times, bedtime, playtime. It helps the world make sense. Second, there are clear roles. It's understood that the adults set the safe boundaries, and the kid's job is to experiment and push the limits within that safe space. And third, you have limits. There are absolute, non-negotiable red zones, of course, things like violence. But outside of that, kids are allowed to stumble and learn from small, natural consequences. Like if you forget your mittens, your hands get cold. That's a lesson they won't forget.
And this is where it all clicks into place. The relationship between order and freedom, or Ordnung and Selbständigkeit. They are not fighting against each other. In this whole way of thinking, one literally cannot exist without the other. They're a team.
Just think about it for a second. What happens when you have independence but no order, no structure? Well, that's not freedom, that's just neglect. And what about the other way around? All order but zero independence. That's not good parenting, that's tyranny. You have to have both.
Really, the best way to think about it is this. Order and independence are the 2 legs of the same body. You absolutely cannot move forward without both of them working together. One provides the stability and the other provides the movement.
So, what does this all boil down to for a parent? What's the big takeaway here? Well, it's about an evolution in your own mindset. It's a journey from one role to another.
And that journey kind of looks like this. You might start out as the controller, the parent whose main job feels like bubble wrapping the world to get rid of any and all risk. But from there, you evolve into the coach, the one who teaches your kid how to spot risks and handle them. And then finally, you become the guardian. You've built such a strong, trustworthy framework that you can confidently step back and trust your child to navigate the world inside it.
Which really leaves us with one last big question to think about. It's the question that sits right at the heart of this entire philosophy.
Is our ultimate goal to try and build a perfectly safe, risk-free world for our kids? Or is our goal to build capable, resilient kids who can confidently navigate the complex, messy, and risky world that actually exists?
It's a strange question, right? Is letting kids fail actually the best way to help them succeed? It sounds completely backward, but this very paradox is the absolute heart of the German parenting philosophy we're going to unpack today. It really forces us to think about risk and responsibility in a whole new light. So, let's get right into that paradox. We live in a world that's pretty dominated by helicopter parenting, where the goal is to smooth out every bump in the road for our kids. But this German approach, it does the exact opposite. It leans into risk, with the core belief that real growth doesn't come from being protected from challenges, but from meeting them head-on.
This quote just says it all, doesn't it? The idea is so simple, but wow, it's powerful. Handling risk isn't some optional side quest in childhood. It's a mandatory part of the main story. And that belief really shapes everything, from how kids play at the park to how arguments are handled at home.
Okay, so how does this actually work in practice? Well, it's built on two foundational pillars. Let's start with the first one, radical self-reliance. And we're not just talking about, tying your own shoelaces. This is way deeper. It's about building a core, internal sense of being capable and being accountable for yourself.
The German word for this is Selbständigkeit. Let's try it. Selbständigkeit. Now, it's a word that doesn't really have a perfect one-to-one translation in English because it's so much more than just independence. It really describes a whole state of being, managing yourself, being responsible for yourself, and having the confidence to face a risk and its outcome.
And it's so important to get this distinction right. Selbständigkeit is not about neglect. It's not about just leaving a kid alone to figure things out. No, it's about actively teaching them to have responsibility for themselves, which is a totally different universe from just an absence of parental responsibility.
So, if you break it down, it's got these three key parts. First, managing your own stuff. Second, owning the consequences of your choices, good or bad. And third, building up the confidence to walk into an uncertain situation. You put those three together, and that's the recipe for resilience.
Let's make this real. Picture a playground in Germany. You're probably not going to see parents shadowing their kids every single move. They tend to hang back. They trust their kid to explore, to climb maybe a little bit higher than feels comfortable, and to learn their own physical limits. The playground becomes this amazing little training ground for assessing risk.
And it's not just physical. This applies to social stuff too. Say two kids are fighting over a toy. The instinct for many of us is to jump in and solve it. But there, the adults will often just watch. They let it play out, because they know kids don't learn how to solve problems from a lecture. They learn it from having real arguments, feeling real frustration, and eventually finding their own way through it.
Okay, so if self-reliance is the big goal, what's the tool you use to get there? That brings us to our second pillar, logical consequences. This is the how-to manual for the whole philosophy.
And here's our second big German word, consequence, pronounced Konsequenz. Now, it literally translates to consequence, but in this context, it's a very specific system. It's all about cause and effect, where the result of an action is directly and logically tied to that action. It's not random, it's not emotional, it's just logical.
And this is such a critical difference. Think about it. A punishment is often totally random and usually driven by a parent's frustration, right? Like, you spilled your milk, so you can't watch TV. The two things have nothing to do with each other. A logical consequence, on the other hand, is a learning opportunity. It's not about making a kid pay for something. It's about helping them understand how the world works.
And this whole system has some really clear rules. 1, the consequence has to be directly linked to the action. 2, it has to be realistic and something you can actually enforce. And 3, and this is maybe the most important, it's never, ever supposed to be about shaming or humiliating the child. The goal is always to teach.
The classic example they use is the lunchbox lesson. Here's how it plays out. Step 1, the child forgets their lunchbox at home. Step 2, the parent fights every instinct they have to rush to the school and rescue them. They don't intervene. Step 3, the child experiences the direct, logical consequence of their action. They're hungry or have to figure something out. And Step 4, the lesson sinks in way deeper than any lecture ever could. Oh, I'm responsible for my own stuff.
But here's the thing. Neither of these pillars, not self-reliance, not logical consequences, can actually work on their own. They have to be built on top of a really critical foundation, a calm, consistent, and totally nonviolent approach to raising kids.
And I want to be clear, this isn't just a popular parenting style, it is literally the law. Back in the year 2000, Germany made all forms of physical punishment in child rearing illegal. That sends a massive signal throughout the entire culture about the rights of children.
And the law itself is incredibly specific. The German Civil Code doesn't just forbid hitting, it also forbids psychological injuries and other humiliating measures. So this legal safety net is there to make sure that discipline is always about teaching, never about using fear or power to control a child. So, when you put all of these pieces together, what do you get? What's the big picture here? What does this whole philosophy really boil down to? Well, it really comes down to this simple but profound formula. It's a system that says a big yes to three things: order, consequence, and consistency. And it gives a huge, definite no to one thing: physical punishment. It's a framework that's all about respectful guidance. So, in the end, what might look like a hands-off, maybe even risky, way of parenting is actually incredibly intentional. It's about building this really sturdy structure of rules and trust, and then giving kids the freedom to move around, to test boundaries, and most importantly, to learn within that safe structure. And that's really the question this leaves us with, isn't it? In a culture where our first instinct is so often to shield our kids from every possible mistake or discomfort, this whole philosophy asks us to think differently. It challenges us to see every stumble, every forgotten lunchbox, every scraped knee not as a failure we need to prevent, but as a crucial lesson on the path to becoming a strong, resilient, and truly self-reliant person.
When I say German discipline, what pops into your head? For a lot of people, right, it's this image of super strict rules, maybe a little cold, kind of rigid. It's a stereotype that's been hanging around forever. But what if that stereotype is completely missing the point? I mean, what if this whole system isn't really about locking kids down, but about creating a totally different kind of freedom? A freedom that, and this is the key, can only grow when it has a clear, secure structure around it.
So here's how we're going to break this down. We're going to look at 4 big ideas. First, how they think about boundaries. Second, why play is treated like the most serious job a kid can have. Third, this wild concept of the forest as a classroom. And finally, we'll see how it all comes together. Okay, first up, freedom needs boundaries. This idea is right at the core of the German approach. It's a concept they call Grenzen setzen. Now, Grenzen setzen literally just means to set boundaries. But the goal here isn't about control. It's about creating a world for a child that's predictable and safe. Think about it. If a kid knows the rules today and knows they'll be the same tomorrow, they feel secure. And that feeling of security, that's the foundation for literally everything else.
And I love the metaphor they use to explain this. These boundaries, they're not a wall, you know? They're not there to block a kid's progress. Instead, think of them like a guardrail on a set of stairs. The guardrail doesn't stop you from climbing up, right? It just stops you from falling off the side. It guides your path and creates safety, which is what lets you explore with confidence.
So how do they actually communicate these boundaries? Well, it's not with yelling or punishments. They use a specific tool called Ich-Botschaften, which translates to I messages. And it's a really subtle but incredibly powerful shift in how you talk. And this example just nails the difference. So instead of labeling the kid and saying, "You are being naughty," which is like an attack on who they are, the focus shifts to how the parent feels about a specific action. I feel worried when you run close to the road. See that? You're correcting the behavior without shaming the child. The whole insight is that the action is the problem, not the person. That's huge. All right, let's move on to our second big idea, and you'll see how this all connects. It's this concept of play being the most serious work of childhood. And this idea goes way, way back to the invention of kindergarten itself. You know, the word kindergarten is actually German. It means children's garden. A guy named Friedrich Froebel came up with it because he had this beautiful idea that children are like little plants. You can't force them to grow, you just have to give them the right conditions. And for him, the best soil and sunlight for a kid's mind was just play. And that philosophy is totally alive and well today in their preschool system, which they call Kita. So in these Kita schools, they're not pushing kids to read or do math problems at age 4. Nope. The focus is completely on other stuff. Social skills, emotional development, and, this is the big one, just feeding their natural curiosity. All that academic pressure, they can wait.
And this whole philosophy of curiosity, it applies to everything. I mean, nothing is considered taboo. Subjects that might make other people kind of squeamish, the body, birth, even death, they're all treated as just normal parts of life. The message this sends to a kid is so powerful. Your body is nothing to be ashamed of, and no question you have is a bad one.
Okay, now we get to the idea that might sound the most out there, the most radical of all, the forest as a laboratory. This is where we see that whole German philosophy taken to its most literal and, honestly, most fascinating conclusion.
So, welcome to the Waldkindergarten, the forest kindergarten. We're talking about kids aged 3 to 6 spending their entire day outside. Rain, shine, snow, doesn't matter. They're building fires to stay warm. They're learning to use real saws and knives, with supervision, of course. They're climbing trees, and believe me, they are getting very, very muddy.
And I know what you're probably thinking right now. Is this safe? Aren't they going to get hurt? Won't they be sick all the time? I mean, these are the exact questions that pop into most parents' heads when they first hear about this.
Okay, but get this. The reality, which is backed up by years of research, is pretty astonishing. Kids in these forest schools actually have fewer injuries than kids on a normal padded playground. So why is that? Well, because a slippery log or a bumpy path forces them to learn how to assess risk. It teaches them to understand their own limits and to pay attention in a way that a flat rubber surface just never could.
And the benefits just keep coming. The research shows that when these kids get to primary school, they have better concentration, better social skills. They have stronger immune systems because they've been out in the elements. And, this is the kicker for a lot of people, their academics aren't hurt at all. In fact, in some studies, they're even a little bit ahead.
So you see, the forest isn't just some pretty backdrop for them to play in, it's a laboratory. It's a place for learning about controlled risk. It's where kids learn real judgment, resilience, and self-reliance, not because someone told them to, but because they're actually doing it.
So, when you put all these pieces together, what do you get? Let's zoom out and look at the big picture here, which is really a philosophy of growth. You've got the guardrails at home, the total freedom of play in the kita, and then the managed risks of the forest. It's all one connected system, right? And the goal through all of it is to raise kids who aren't just obedient, but who are resilient, curious, and truly capable of figuring out the world for themselves.
And that really leaves us with one last big question to think about. This whole German model seems to suggest that real protection isn't about bubble wrapping our kids and getting rid of all risk. It's about teaching them how to be competent. So it makes you wonder, right? Is the real purpose of raising a child to protect them from the world, or is it to prepare them for it?
So, let me just ask you this right off the bat. Would you let your 7-year-old play with a real saw or cook their own food over an open fire? I know, it sounds pretty intense, right? But in Germany, well, the answer might really surprise you. Now, this isn't about being reckless or just letting kids run wild, not at all. It's actually a very structured, thought-out philosophy, and it has a name, Abenteuerspielplatz. You could almost think of it as a school of risk. So, Abenteuerspielplatz, it literally translates to adventure playground, and that's exactly what they are. These are professionally supervised places where kids are actively encouraged to get their hands dirty, to experiment with real tools and materials, things that would be completely off-limits almost anywhere else. Okay, take a look at this. This is a famous adventure playground in Berlin. We're talking open fire pits, we're talking real hammers, saws, and nails. Kids are using scrap wood to build their own forts and huts. And get this, the biggest rule, parents have to stay outside. This is a kids-only zone. So the first thing you're probably thinking is this safe? I mean, is this even responsible? And you're not alone in asking that. It's a question that has literally been tested in the German court system. And this is where it gets so interesting. A court ruling from way back in 1978 really laid out the whole philosophy. It said that the entire point of these playgrounds is educational. It's to teach kids that risk exists and to show them how to handle it by actually experiencing it for themselves, but in a managed setting. So the takeaway is huge. Instead of trying to bubble wrap the world and eliminate all risk, which we all know is impossible, this approach is about creating risk-literate children. Risk is treated like any other subject, like math or reading. It's a skill you learn, something that requires practice and judgment. But this idea isn't just locked away inside these playgrounds. Nope, it's actually woven into the very fabric of German society. It's created this entire ecosystem that's built to foster independence. Just check out these typical milestones. A 6-year-old walking to school alone? For many of us, that just sounds crazy. But in Germany, it's seen as a totally normal step. And from there, they're running errands. And by the time they're young teens, they're navigating entire public transit systems all by themselves. So you have to ask, how is any of this possible? Well, it really comes down to a fundamental difference in mindset. In a lot of places, a child's freedom is an individual choice. It's about what a parent allows. But in Germany, it's a collective system. Society itself enables this independence with things like pedestrian-friendly cities and a culture where seeing a kid by themselves isn't a red flag. It's just normal. And this leads to such a powerful idea. You can't just tell a kid to be independent. You actually have to build a world where they can safely practice being independent. Individual freedom needs that structural support to work. All right, so let's zoom in. We've seen the playground, we've seen the city streets. Now let's go right into the family home, to the dinner table. Because this whole philosophy of participation and self-reliance, it gets practiced there every single day in this one simple, amazing tradition. It's called Abendbrot, which just means evening bread. And the whole idea is that it's simple. It's an uncooked meal. There's no fancy, complicated cooking, no pressure on a parent to be a gourmet chef every single night. It's just good bread, cheese, some cold cuts, and fresh veggies. And here is the absolute key, the child's role. A kid isn't just a passive guest waiting to be served. They are an active participant. They're preparing their own plate, making their own choices. And yeah, it might seem like a really small thing, but it's a daily lesson in autonomy. It's a little dose of self-sufficiency every single night. And the messages that this simple meal sends are just so powerful. It tells a child, you are a contributor to this family, not a guest in your own home. And it completely shifts the focus of dinner time away from the stress and labor of cooking and puts it right where it belongs, on the conversation, on just being together. Okay, so let's tie all of this together. We've got kids using saws, kids walking to school alone, and kids making their own dinner. What's the real end goal here? What's it all about? That consistent message, from the adventure playground all the way to the evening bread, it's all about participation. The goal isn't just to raise a kid who can take care of themselves. It's about raising a person who understands from a really young age that they are a capable, competent, and necessary part of their family and their community. There's this one thought that really captures it perfectly. The value isn't in how big or complicated the act is. The value is in the agency, in the feeling of being in charge. That one simple slice of bread that a child makes for themselves, it can be just as powerful for teaching self-reliance and belonging as some huge fancy feast. And that kind of leaves us with one last big idea to chew on. We so often think about teaching independence as a way to prepare our kids to, eventually leave the nest. But what if the German model is showing us something totally different? What if teaching competence and self-reliance isn't actually about preparing a child to leave you, but is instead the most powerful way to empower them to truly and fully belong?
In Germany, it is totally normal to see first graders walking to school all by themselves. At their preschools, called Kitas, kids are using real tools. We're talking saws, hammers. 4-year-olds are having sleepovers without their parents. And yep, you heard that right, they even learn how to manage fire with careful supervision.
Now, for a lot of us, the immediate reaction is just, whoa. We might think it's reckless or just straight up dangerous. That word irresponsible gets thrown around a lot. But what if there's a really deep, intentional philosophy behind all of this?
So let's do that. Let's get past that initial shock and really unpack the why behind what they're doing. It's all about understanding the rationale behind the risk.
The whole thing really boils down to 3 foundational pillars. First, children are seen as individuals with their own rights. Second, risk is actually a lesson, not a threat to be avoided at all costs. And third, independence isn't just a family goal, it's a societal one.
And that first principle, it's a total game changer. A child isn't seen as something a parent owns, but as a person with rights from day one. This includes the right not to be hit, the right to be told what's going on, to be asked for their opinion, and to speak their mind freely.
Now this is where the idea of risk gets completely flipped on its head. Little setbacks aren't seen as failures you have to prevent.
Instead, things like falling down, forgetting your homework, or having a small argument with a friend, they're viewed as small exercises. They're essential practice for handling the much bigger challenges life is going to throw at you.
Okay, so you might be thinking, that's great for Germany, but I don't live there. And that's fair. So the key isn't to just copy these practices exactly. It's about understanding the principles and figuring out how we can apply these lessons about micro-risks no matter where we live.
And this is where we have to be really clear. The goal is not to expose children to real danger. Of course not. There are absolute risks you avoid, things like violence or abuse. But then there's this whole other category of manageable educational risks, these micro-risks that actually build resilience. If we bubble wrap our kids and eliminate all of these, we also take away their chance to learn.
This all pushes us to ask a pretty fundamental question. Is my child mine, like a project that I need to perfect and control, or are they a separate individual that I just have the privilege of guiding for a little while? Being honest with yourself about that, it changes everything.
And this whole idea is held together by a key German concept called Konsequenz. Now, it doesn't just mean consequence for the kid, it's actually about parental self-discipline. It's a whole idea of saying less, but always following through on what you do say. That's what creates a predictable, secure world for a child to explore from.
So what does this look like in the real world? Well, think about what these small, controlled risks actually teach. The parent's job isn't to stop the risk, it's to make sure the environment is safe enough for the lesson. So letting a kid buy a snack alone at a familiar corner store, that teaches responsibility. Not jumping in to solve a minor spat with a friend, that teaches social skills. And yeah, not rushing to school with a forgotten lunchbox, just letting them be a little hungry one time, that teaches a powerful lesson in consequences. It's all about calibrating the risk to the child, not wiping it out completely.
All of this leads us to a final thought, a really powerful metaphor that kind of captures the heart of this whole philosophy, the bridge to independence.
So, imagine childhood is like a bridge. The adult's job isn't to carry the child all the way across. Instead, they hold their hand, they walk alongside them for a while, and then, slowly, they start to step back.
Eventually, they let that child walk the rest of the way alone. But here's the key. This is not abandonment. It's an act of profound trust, and it's built on the kid's knowledge that if they ever truly need help, they can turn around and someone will still be there waiting for them at the start of that bridge.
Look, the point of all this isn't to say that the German model is perfect or that everyone should do it. The most important takeaway is what this philosophy asks of us as the adults in a child's life.
And that leaves us with one last, really challenging question. In our own lives, when we hold a child's hand, are we really doing it to guide them across their bridge? Or are we doing it to soothe our own anxiety? Thinking about that, well, that might just be the first step toward building a bridge of your own.